multiple choice questions or objective type questions based on Nissim Ezekiel, and his poem name is A Poem of Dedication. Okay, A Poem of Dedication. Now, most important questions will be discussed only of this poem of this Indo-Anglian poet, and the very first question is related to Nissim Ezekiel, that Nissim Ezekiel was born where? He was born in Mumbai. Nissim Ezekiel was born in Mumbai. Nissim Ezekiel belongs to a community of Ben Israel. He belongs to which community? He belongs to this particular community of Ben Israel. The third one is the first published volume of verse. The first published volume of verse of Nissim Ezekiel was A Time to Change. The first published volume of verse was A Time to Change. Next question is beside writing poetry, Nissim Ezekiel also wrote a number of plays. Okay, beside writing poetry, he also wrote a lot of plays. Next question is Nissim Ezekiel was awarded Sahitya Academy Award. In which year he was awarded Sahitya Academy Award, or Sahitya Academy Award was given to Nissim Ezekiel in which year? In 1983. So, this was the year when he was awarded Sahitya Academy Award. Next important question is opening poem of Nissim Ezekiel's second book of verse is. Second book of verse is A Poem of Dedication, that has also been prescribed in your syllabus. Opening poem of Nissim Ezekiel's second book of verse is A Poem of Dedication. Next one is Nissim Ezekiel style of poetry is conversational. Okay, what is his style of poetry? It is not elegy, not sonnet, not philosophical. That is, the answer will be it is conversational. Next question is Nissim Ezekiel's first volume of verse was published in 1952. Okay, this question can be asked in this way also. The very first question, Nissim Ezekiel's first volume of verse was published in which year? So, the very first question that it was published in 1952, and in the same year in 1952 when his first volume of verse was published, in the same year he was also married. Okay, in the same year in 1952 Nissim Ezekiel was also married, and to whom? To Malini Jacob. So, he was married to Malini Jacob in which year? In 1952. So, there are three questions related to this one. Next one is Nissim Ezekiel's second volume of verse. Okay, that was first volume of verse, and now it was in 1952, and the second volume of verse, the name of that second volume of verse was 60 poems, and it was published in 1953. Okay, that was in 1952, and this one is of in 1953. In the same year he joined in the same year in 1953 the Illustrated Weekly, right? He joined the Illustrated Weekly. The next important question is, Ezekiel became one of the pioneers of a type of Indo-Anglian poetry, and that is known as. Ezekiel became one of the pioneers of a type of Indo-Anglian poetry, and it is known as new poetry. New poetry. The next question is, under what influences Ezekiel portrayed a galaxy of themes such as urban life, sexuality, alienation, etc. Under what influences? So under what influences Ezekiel he portrayed these kinds of theme? Under the influence of modernism. So modernist. The answer will be under modernist influences he portrayed a galaxy of themes. Next one is background casually. Background casually is an autobiographical poem of whom? Of Nissim Ezekiel. Nissim Ezekiel, he wrote an autobiographical poem, and the name of that autobiographical poem is Background Casually. Who wrote essay Naipaul's India and Mine? Naipaul's India and Mine. This essay was also written by Nissim Ezekiel. Next one is the tone. The tone of most of his poem is. The tone of most of the poems of Nissim Ezekiel is optimist. Okay, optimist is the tone of his most of his poems. Next one is, choose the Ezekiel's poem in which villagers' superstitiousness is given words. In which villagers' superstitiousness is given verse, and the name of that poem was Night of the Scorpio. Night of the Scorpio. What Thomas Hardy was to England in the early 20th century? Name one who is to India in the post-independence era in English poetry. Okay, what Thomas Hardy was to England in the early 20th century? So, who was to India or who is to India in the post-independence era in English poetry? So, it is Nissim Ezekiel. What Thomas Hardy was to England, Nissim Ezekiel is to India. To Ezekiel, poverty in the land of plenty is surprising as to Ezekiel, poverty in the land of plenty is surprising. As a poet, he sketched the dismal picture of poverty in his poem, The Truth About the Floods. Then 21 is, in all his poems, Ezekiel leaves the impression of. In all his poems, Ezekiel leaves the impression of an urban poet. An urban poet. Now, the next question is, most important next question is 28. Ezekiel's famous work 60 Poems was published in which year? Ezekiel's famous work 60 Poems was published in 1953. Okay, 1953, and this question is very important because it has appeared in several years and it is being repeated, that is again and again it is being asked. Ezekiel's famous work 60 Poems was published in 1953. Then next question is not important, right? All these questions are not important. Then the 33, 34 no and 35. Most important Ezekiel prefers a poetry of human expression. He prefers what kind of poetry? A poetry of human expression. Ezekiel stands for, he stands for in his poetry for what? For simplicity and clarity, coherence, lucidity and harmony. Okay, all of the above. He stands for all these qualities in his poetry. 37 one is Ezekiel prefers in his poetry simplicity of thought, simplicity of language, subjectivity. He prefers all these qualities in his poetry. So, the answer will be all of the above: simplicity of thought, simplicity of language and subjectivity. 38 one is a poem empty of knowledge is a poem that merely skims the surface of life. A poem empty of knowledge in a poem that merely skims the surface of life. Whose statement in this? Okay, whose statement is this? Of Nissim Ezekiel. Nissim Ezekiel said so, that a poem empty of knowledge in a poem that merely skims the surface of life. 39th one is, according to Ezekiel, what is an essential part of poetry? According to Ezekiel, what is? Fill in the blanks. So, what is? That is form. Form is an essential part of poetry according to Ezekiel. Then 41 is, according to Ezekiel, form should develop as the poem develops. Form is a basic mode of expression. The relationship between form and content is inevitable, and all these are according to Ezekiel. All these must be a part of a poetry, all of the above. Okay, form is a basic mode of expression. Form should develop as the poem develops, and the relationship between form and content is inevitable, that is necessary. 41. Nissim Ezekiel has so far published how many collections of poems? Nissim Ezekiel has so far, it is so far, he has published how many collections of poems? 6. He has published so far 6 collections of poems. Then the next one is 43. The outstanding characteristics of Ezekiel's poetry are, the main characteristics or the outstanding characteristics of Ezekiel's poetry are a perfect blending of form and content, versatility, informality and frankness, authenticity of expression and flawless craftsmanship. All these are the main characteristics of his poetry. So, the answer will be all of the above. What makes Ezekiel a modern poet? What makes Ezekiel a modern poet? The simplicity and conversational ease of his language, the economy and exactness in the use of words, the sharpness of his wit and irony. So, all these qualities are which makes Ezekiel a modern poet. So, the answer will be all of the above. In Ezekiel's poetry, there is conversational directness and ease, obscurity and mere angularity are avoided, beauty and bareness of statement often go together. So, the answer will be all of the above because all the statements are true. 48 one is, in his latest volumes of poems, what we find? In his latest volumes of poems, what we find? We find a walk striving after wisdom, a pull towards philosophy, intermittent throbs of frustration. So, all of the above. 49 one is Nissim Ezekiel died in Mumbai after a prolonged battle with Alzheimer's, that is Alzheimer's disease. This was the disease which he was suffering from. Alzheimer's disease, and on which date? 9th of January 2004. So, he died of this disease in this year in 2004. Now, other questions are based on his poem, A Poem of Dedication. A poem of dedication that has been prescribed in your syllabus, and all these questions are very important for exams. So, a poem of dedication is a poem of identity. It is a poem of identity. The next one is language of the Ezekiel's poem. A poem of dedication is language of this poem. A poem of dedication is, so the language is, the language is conversational. The language is conversational. Of which poem? Of the poem, A Poem of Dedication. Okay. The language of this poem, A Poem of Dedication, is conversational. 52 one is, in a poem of dedication, the poet expresses his will to. The poet Nissim Ezekiel, he expresses his will to control desires within human limits. So, in this poem, he expresses this will to control desires within human limits. 53 one is, what should a man do according to the poet? In this poem, because all these questions are based on this poem, A Poem of Dedication. So, according to Nissim Ezekiel, what should a man do? He should search truth about his own identity. So, he try to search truth. The poet wishes to restrain ambitions within limits. Okay, the answer to this question will be, the poet wishes to restrain ambitions within limits. Next one is, the poet is to have powers of a dictator. The poet is then blank, to have powers of a dictator, unwilling. The poet is unwilling, he is not desirous and he is unwilling to have powers of a dictator. He does not want to be a dictator. What superhuman qualities are referred to? What superhuman qualities are referred in this poem, A Poem of Dedication? So, the superhuman qualities are referred here: yogis, concentration; saints, charity; and tyrants, endless power. All of the above. All of the above qualities are referred in this poem. 57. For which human quality does the poet rejoice? For which human quality does the poet rejoice? He rejoices for this particular human quality, writing poetry. For writing poetry, this human quality, he or the poet rejoices. And the last question is, from which book of poetry has A Poem of Dedication been taken? This question is also very important, that A Poem of Dedication, this poem has been taken from this collection of his poems. This was 60 poems. Okay, 60 poems. From which book of poetry has A Poem of Dedication been taken? From 60 poems. So, all these were the important questions for the examination based on Nissim Ezekiel's poem, A Poem of Dedication.